Tom Mercer to our stage. Let me get this set up for you. And I know he's doing this for me as a favor, but this guy preaches all over the country, teaches about this wonderful concept you're going to learn today. And when Christina and I got there, we just felt so loved by him and his wife and family that we knew that this was home for us. And he would ask me questions all the time that had nothing to do with the platform, but he would ask me questions. How's your wife doing? How's your kids doing? What does it look like for games? Like, what are you getting there? Like, all these great questions that I had never been asked before, because I felt like I was a producer, that I always had to produce. And what Pastor Tom was teaching me was that that's ministry as well, that your family's important, it's priority. You got to get out of here when you can. And so with that being said, thank you so much for dealing with my stubbornness, with my whatever it was that I brought, probably heartache and pain certain days.
It was significant. No, Jonathan, you were a gift. You were a gift. And when you said that you were leaving High Desert Church, that didn't bother me. What bothered me was that you were taking your family too. And if you'd have left them all there, we'd have had a blast without you. But it was good. We had a good time. Only lasted a short season, but God does what God does, and we are blessed to be a part of it ever, actually. So, anyway.
And the good thing is we get to steal him from California because his wonderful son lives here in Phoenix. You want
Only
to share
begotten
about
son. Yeah, he lives in Chandler. They don't attend the Hamilton's church, but anyway, they attended a good church there, and they have 4 of our 11 grandchildren, so we come out and hang.
Well, one of the things that I loved and just what compelled me to your story was being somewhere for so long. And I think my generation, or even generations after me, things have changed. They're not as consistent as they once were. We're constantly getting the iPhone 15 looks just like the iPhone 14, but we got to have the iPhone 15, right? Like, we're just constantly getting new technology, new social media. Yeah. It affects our decision making with commitment. Something happens and we're just sort of like, even with High Desert Church, as I thought, maybe it wasn't the direction I wanted to go in. Prematurely I started making decisions. What kept you in the high desert for so long, pastoring one church?
Well, he never released me from that church until April 1st, 2022 was a day that will go down in infamy. We left 38 years. And
can we just...
Yeah, no,
38.
Hey, we were blessed to be there. We saw some people come and go. I mean, you were there for like a day and a half. And, but, with our senior leadership group, we have like 150 years of ministry legacy in one church between just 4 guys. And so it's a great place to be. And the desert is not a place, I appreciated the comments in the last session, the desert is not a place most people aspire to go. And forgive me if that sounds offensive, but in my world, our world, that's true. The beach, you talked about Miami, but Southern California beaches where I grew up was where we really would have loved to have been. But the Lord sent us there. The desert, symbolically in the Bible, it symbolizes the abandonment of God. Just a word of encouragement for you, and I have the gift of encouragement, so we'll continue that in this session. But God sent us there. Victorville has the highest percentage of government-assisted families in the state of California. It's a low to middle, low income community. It is not a place that people choose. We were joking a few days ago. Jonathan was at a conference where I spoke, and it's hard to even hire people because they get to know us, and the individual who we may be talking to for a particular role feels maybe God's calling me there, and then their spouse looks up Victorville on the internet and says, we ain't going there. And so it's hard, but God is there.
Yeah.
And there are an awful lot of people that he loves there.
Yeah.
So we were there for a long time. But, to answer your question, we were offered positions. It's funny in ministry when you plant a church and God gives the increase, and he always is the one who gives the increase. It's nothing we do. We just slow him down. And he you just love your wife, you love your spouse, you keep out of trouble, and you teach the word, and good things happen over time.
Yeah.
And that's what he did there. And we would have, but as the church grew, as many churches grow, some faster than others, but churches develop, and Tribe City will too. And then the phone starts ringing. And people say, hey, we got a gig at the beach. Would you like that? Or I remember Jackson, Wyoming, just south of Yellowstone. I remember Hawaii and those phone calls and the questions like, would you consider coming here? And I'll be honest with you, I said no. And they said, oh. And they said, would you at least pray about it? And I said, no. I said, I only pray about what I wonder about. I know some things. I don't have to ask God, should I love my wife today?
That's good.
I mean, Lord, would you have me love my wife today? That's kind of a stupid prayer and a waste of both God's time and mine. So I just love my wife. So I knew the Lord still had a call on my life for HDC. And it worked out really well. As you said, the Lord was very gracious. Let me tell you what I deserve. I deserve to die and go to hell. Anything after that is a blessing. And through Christ, we have that opportunity to go to heaven. And then he calls us to ministry. And he says, you have a chance to change the world now. We said, really? I mean, we were just dying and going to hell a few minutes ago, and now you're calling us to change the world. And then he says in certain places, and we'll be able to pay you so you can give your full-time attention to it. It's like, really? This is getting ridiculous, God. And then he blesses. Oh, Jonathan, I can't even tell you how great that is.
Yeah. And it's so good.
And how proud I am of you.
Thank you.
And those wise men, some of them still at HDC. We talk about you all the time.
Yeah. And I would say this, like one of the things that you learn in ministry too, you realize very quickly like who is for you and who is not, right? And one of the things that when we were going through our season of transition, man, there wasn't one person didn't call us on the phone and said, man, how are you? What can we do to help you? It was actually High Desert Church that sent us to church planting discovery. They paid for us, for Christina and I to go to make sure that this is what we wanted to do. They housed us when we were getting ready to plant here. And this is beyond his leadership, but what he set foundation-wise. They gave us a donation. They gave us a financial gift to get us started. And it just reminds me that God puts us in places for us to learn and grow. And what we may not value that relationship today, but there's a reason why we're there. And I remember once again learning all that. We were just sitting a couple of days ago in the mountains, just reminiscing. But one of the things that I learned quickly when I got there was a great concept, and I had not understood anything like this before in a strategic and simple way. And one of the things that I started to pick up very quickly on was reminding what God has designed me and built me for.
Right.
And so we read this wonderful book that Pastor Tom wrote, And I want you to just share your story. We got time, and I want you to hear this. I want you to share your story. It may not be everything, but we did the back end.
No, I get
So
it.
we'll jump into the front end.
Yeah.
Would you just share your story? Share with us how God has blessed you, how He grew your ministry, how He's continuing to do that now.
Well, I'm a I'm a PK. I grew up in a pastor's family. I grew up in church, and my dad was a great pastor. He never pastored large churches, and he was a little more nomadic in terms of how God called him from church to church to church. But we had a great life growing up in the church, and went to Biola University and Talbot Seminary, good schools out there in Southern California. And then I became a student pastor at a church, my first full-time position as a pastor post school. And then my senior pastor invited me to attend a seminar that shared a principle called the oikos principle. And just to kind of tee this up, because I know that's one of the things Jonathan wanted to talk about today. We'll talk about it tomorrow too. But the oikos principle revolves around the idea of this oikos. Oikos has nothing to do with yogurt, contrary to what most people think. But the oikos is a Greek word, and it's a reference to the people and the terminology we have kind of landed on, the people who sit on the front row of your life. 8 to 15 people God has supernaturally and strategically placed in your life. It could be family members, could be neighbors, could be coworkers, could be classmates, but people that you share life with on a regular basis. The Greeks called that group of people your oikos. It technically means extended family, not just your blood relationships, but people that you interact with daily or often. And this is what the oikos principle states. 95% of the people who come to Christ primarily because of one or more relationships in their oikos. I was exposed to that idea like starting the second year that I was a pastor, a youth pastor. And I said, wait a minute. At that point, it was just an overwhelming majority of people who come to Christ through the oikos relationship or relationships. I've since learned that it's over 95%. And that's an extraordinary metric, which tells me that my ministry it told me back then, and this is 45 years ago when I heard this at the seminar, and I said, that's crazy. Driving home from that seminar with my senior pastor, I said, can I start to play around with this idea intentionally in our student ministry program? And he said, yeah, he didn't want to do it church-wide because he had a lot of other things going on church-wide, but he said, knock yourself out. So a few years later, our youth group that had about a half a dozen kids in it had 300 kids in it. And so it was life-changing for me. It is not an evangelism program. It's a worldview. That God has placed these people in the front row of our lives. They have the best seats in the house. That's why we call it front row. This room is perfect for this visual. Picture your life taking place in a room like this. And everybody you interact with has filled this auditorium. And some of them are sitting back in the section back there because you don't interact with them very often. Others are a little closer. But there are 8 to 15 people God has placed in your front row, best seats in the house, to hear what you say about faith and to watch the way you live your life. That group of people is your oikos. Let me put it another way. If you could be mic'd up, let's say that you got a great production team here, and they were able to hack into global television systems, and so the whole world suddenly was watching me right now. Between 7 and 8 billion people were hearing what I'm going to say next. And I told them that I was I was a faithful follower of Jesus Christ. Maybe 8 billion people heard that. Only 8 to 15 people would know if I was telling the truth, because they have the best seats in the house to know what makes me tick. Now, 95% of the people who come to faith through that kind of a relationship. So our mantra, we had a lot of them at HTC. But our mantra at HTC was, okay, you got a front row. My job as your pastor is to better prepare you to reach those people for Christ. And so sometimes, we did parenting things because we got kids in our front row. We did marriage things because we had a spouse sitting in our front row. We just did a lot of fun things because people sitting in the front row like to have fun. And enjoyable was one of our core values at HTC. So it's an extraordinary metric. Or number or percentage. In fact, statisticians call 95% a shutdown metric. It just shuts the conversation down. It's essentially, in statistics, 95% is essentially 100%. I have asked this question of hundreds of thousands of people in audiences on 5 continents around the world. How many of you would say, understanding what an oikos is, you would say, Tom, I'm sitting here today as a Christ follower, as a follower of Jesus, primarily because of the influence of someone in my oikos, whether it be a parent or a coworker or a classmate or a friend or a neighbor. God used primarily them to help me understand who he was and to bring me to faith. And if you were to say that with the folks sitting here today, how many of you would say that's true, that it's because of an oikos relationship? Hand really high. And just hold it up for a second, and you can look around the room. I've asked that question of hundreds of audiences, and literally, Jonathan, hundreds of thousands of people, different ethnic groups, different countries, different languages, different styles of worship, rich churches, poor churches, rural churches, inner city churches, fat churches, skinny churches, every kind of church. I've never had one group of people give me a different answer than the one you just gave me. That has got to transform the way I see leadership and ministry. It's got to. Because if people, let's just say that when it comes to Stripe City or Legacy Church or High Desert Church, let's just say 100 people are going to give their lives to Christ this year because of this church family. At least 95 of them are going to come to faith, and it has nothing to do with this guy. It has nothing to do with production. It has nothing to do with the stage. It has nothing to do with nothing except you. And that's why there's such a heavy emphasis in the New Testament on living a life that is worthy of the gospel. Whatever happens, what did Paul say? Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. Why? Because age 15 people are watching you, man. They're watching you. So just make sure you don't screw it up. And when it comes to discipleship, all we're trying to do is put the best product on the field. Because people need to see Jesus, and the only way he sees Jesus is through us. So anyway, that's what an oikos is, and the oikos principle, what it means. And it was, as Jonathan, this, it was so firmly embedded into the fabric of our ministry. But that's all we wanted to do. We had one purpose as a church. I'm going to make you better at reaching your front row. Yeah. And the reason for that is because, and you heard me say this when we were there many times, just follow the numbers, baby. And they will always lead you to the truth. Just follow the data. And anyway.
And I think why I found the principle so intriguing is because I could see it. Like I could tangibly see, as he spoke and said some of those numbers, I can see myself doing that. How many of you are like me where if you're going to get behind something, can we actually do it? Can I speak it? Can I teach it? Can I see it? And for me, I was already sort of doing that. I just didn't have that intention in mind, right? Like we're kind of doing it, but we're not intentionally setting aside time. And one of the values I've learned even more is for my kids, like being able to speak this with my kids, you know. And one of the things we developed is a card that tangibly, and we may learn a little bit tomorrow about that, but you know, how do we have our children invest in people in their lives? Like, and for teaching my sons how to pray, this was an amazing tool, because they didn't know how to pray and they didn't know when to pray. And so before the tool, we're going, well, you know, pray for this and pray for that. But now they have this thing that we pray every night to, and they have a list of things that they've made of people in their life that has been intentional. Do you want to speak a little bit on that? I know we don't have a ton of time.
Yeah, that's fine. I could just say we make a list. Just make a list. Just make a dang list. Can you just, you know, it's the most underrated discipline in the Christian faith. Tee up the people that God has supernaturally and strategically placed in your front row. Yep. You make a list for everything. You make one item lists. So, because you're stupid,
List
right?
for the list.
You got to remember something
Yeah.
that your spouse says, bring home something. Oh, I got to write that down. So here's the most important list you could ever make. Who are the people sitting in your front row seats? Then make a commitment to pray for them every day.
And that small tool I have used sits in my Bible, but it reminds me to think about others. Because what happens, and this is the most overused saying, we're praying for you.
Yeah.
We're praying for you.
Yeah.
Now, let's be real. I'm praying for you. You forgot as soon as you left that person.
Yeah.
And I think going back to this, every time I open my Bible, I see that list there. And it makes me tangibly pray for the prodigals in my life, the people, the purposefuls, the people who I do life with every day, and for my kids, it's the same thing. I've never seen them more excited to pray for their classmates and friends before we did this list, and that has brought some joy in my life. I just want to ask you one or two more questions, but what are some of the myths that we can dispel with the Oikos movement?
Yeah, good question. It's not an evangelism program. Again, it's a set of lenses through which you see the entire world. That's the myth that is so hard for me. I do a lot of work with pastors now, and have for a long time, actually. But they see this as we have a different evangelism program, and I think, well, this is not an evangelism program. This is actually, it's the best discipleship emphasis you could ever embed in your church, because if I'm trying to put the best product on the field, because you got 15 people, got the best seats in the house, and they're watching, I need people in my church to read the Bible, love their spouse, and grow in their faith. Yeah. So it's not an evangelism program. I would just tell you that's the biggest myth. Yeah. And I would also say that Tribe City's not your church, and it's not their church. You'll never even have a church. And you shouldn't even want a church, because you already have enough problems. Yeah. You should be thankful you're part of Christ Church. Yeah. And a myth is sometimes we take ownership of the church that we serve, or the place that we serve, and we forget, you know, the most recent book I wrote, I'm not trying to sell books. They're not even out there. But the title of the book is not My Church. It's just not. And even during the pandemic, we had a lot of conversations with pastors. They didn't know what to do, and they were afraid they're going to screw up the church by, you know, do I keep meeting or not? And there was so much division in the church over that. And my encouragement to them was, just relax, man. It's not your church. I mean, it's Christ's church. You're not going to screw this up. Yeah. He won't let you. And so God seems to bless when we recognize, you know, He said, I will build my church. Yeah. And that's a church the gates of Hades will not overcome. So that's it's good to be reminded that it's not our church. Yeah. So
And I think that's a good concept too for many of us who get stuck in decision making or not going to God in this moment because we're taking so much ownership of something that we're realizing that I've been in leadership most of my life, and what I've learned about church or churches is when they get one thing, they roll with it forever. And even if it's not working, even if it's failing, it's like, well, but that's what got us here.
yeah.
That's what got us here. And I think with this open handedness of saying, hey, this isn't our church, this is God's church, that we're allowing ourselves to let God do what he does. And one of the things we learned in that is through COVID and the pandemic, who in your 45 plus years of ministry never really, as a pastor, went through. And I always tell Tom this because I was watching from another seat, but here he is in his latter years of his ministry and life, and it would be easy for him to just say, "I'm done. Like I did everything that I needed to do." But why did you feel, and you could have different reasons, but why did you feel led, and it's probably an easy answer, but why did you feel led to continue the pastor through those couple of years of COVID?
Well, trust. It's the oikos principle. Really, the front row know you. They trust you. They believe you when you say things because they know. And the church knew me, and so there was a level of trust that you develop over time. And it's funny when you stay in a church. One of the principles I learned was that longevity is ownership. Not that it's any of our church except Jesus' church, but even dealing with people, if you have been there longer, then you have more gravitas than other guys or other people. And so I had, everybody that was at High Desert Church when we got there was either dead or they'd moved on. And so nobody had been there longer than us. And so they trusted me more than they trusted anybody. And I just felt like we should just stick around. They trust us, and it's going to be a tough season. So let's do it. And so anyway, that's the way it worked out. It worked out well.
Well, last question.
Yeah.
What is life like now
Right.
that you've given away, kind of done that assignment is over, and you moved into some new territory? What's life like for you now?
For the last 10 years or 15 years, I guess, now, I've said 10 years for about 5 years, so now I got to switch to 15. The church recognized the dynamic of, the High Desert Church recognized the dynamic of the oikos principle and how it was impacting churches all over the world. So they gave me a month a year to do trainings and travel and speak and write, whatever, just for that idea. It was the church's ministry to the Big C church, the body of Christ at large. And so when it was time to step down, and I knew I wouldn't step down at the right time. I would stay too long or I would leave too early. I wasn't smart enough to nail it. I didn't want to stay too long. I didn't want people checking their watch like, is Mercer ever going to retire? So we stepped down when we could have stayed for another season. But we stepped down, and what we did for a month a year for the last 15 years, now we do all the time through the Oikos movement, which is a new nonprofit. And we just work with pastors, trying to help them align the ministry that they have with the Great Commission. There are a lot of churches that are not aligned with the Great Commission, and the Great Commission is the only thing Jesus gave us to do. One thing. Can't forget that. Write that down. Make a list. Can't forget that. The Great Commission. But it's amazing, Jonathan, and you know this. It's amazing how trends and programs can misdirect our focus away from the only thing Jesus gave us to do. And so we try to help pastors rekindle their first love, which even planning a church is just awesome. Why? You got nothing. You got no money, right? I mean, you got nothing. You don't even have a building.
I'm broke.
Just keep in mind, the The Church of Jesus Christ is growing more quickly in regions that don't have buildings to meet in, don't have professional clergy, and don't have public services on the weekend. The church is growing fastest in the regions of the world that don't have any of those. What do they have? Well, they got the same Holy Spirit, and they work the oikos principle, which is the singular strategy Jesus gave us to build his church. They got it. Every Christian in the world has 8 to 15 people sitting on the front row of their life. And when churches begin to focus on that, good things happen. Even when you don't have buildings and you don't have budgets and you don't have anything. Now, I'm a pastor, was for a long time, so I'm all for pastors. We met on weekends, so I'm all about that. We had buildings. Nothing wrong with having a building. But when people take a couple hours a weekend to listen to you in a place like a local church, it better be about the Great Commission. And in our context, your front row. So that's what we do now. The Oikos movement, you can look it up, just pray for us, oikosmovement.com. We got a great board. We got no money either, which is fine, because we got the same Holy Spirit and we got the Oikos principles, so we're going to be all right. But we're trying to help pastors kind of realign themselves with what Jesus told us to do.
That's good. And we did services, man. We did services. A lot of Christmas services, 10,
Yes,
11 services.
You weren't there long, but we worked you hard.
Oh, you worked me real hard. That's for sure. How many grandkids?
11.
11 grandkids. Can we celebrate 11 grandkids?
And I want to thank you for getting me out of here right now, because my grandson has a basketball game at 1 o'clock, so thank you for that.
Yep, we're going to get you out of here. And how long have you been married?
43 years.
43 years.
You'll see if you attend Tribe City, Saint Cheryl will be here tomorrow, and you'll love her a lot more than you'll like me. She's amazing. So,
hey, well, let's thank Tom once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.